Okay, Marcus, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, man. It's great to kind of Zoom meet you finally. Like, haven't met in person, like we were just saying, but yeah, this is cool.
Zoom is real life right now. I think even in a post-pandemic world, it's like Zoom meetings is real life. We've got to kind of get used to it.
Yeah, this is what we got.
Yeah, we'll get back to having coffee and stuff in person for sure, but
Yeah.
this is the next best thing. So, Marcus, tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do now.
Essentially, I specialize in working with men who are struggling with, maybe having lost control of their eating, whether we want to flat out call that disordered eating, bulimia, binge eating disorder, whatever label we want to put on it. Essentially, I work with guys who feel like they've lost control of their eating habits, especially guys who are either in the fitness industry or have a long history of, strength training and being a gym rat, like so many of us are. And yeah, that's essentially where my heart's at and the area that I work in. I used to just be a commercial gym floor PT, like so many of us, but I chose to kind of specialize in this area when I realized that it's something that really needs addressing and more people need help with it than many of us kind of realize.
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
100% agree with that, and it's more prevalent than people realize in this whole
absolutely.
culture of being your best self. I think there's two sides to a coin of people wanting to improve their health and fitness and then it going too far.
Oh yeah, yeah. What what's your experience with that in particular? You kind of say that from a position where it sounds like you're saying that from a point of having some personal understanding.
I think it's but for me there's that difference between wanting to lose body fat and being in a place where maybe that would help, right?
Hmm.
So being in a stage where you are overweight, for example,
Hmm.
and it would be a bearing on your health to not have that be solved.
Hmm.
But then there's the dark side of losing body fat and the implications that might mean to your relationship with food.
Yeah.
Thinking in foods in sort of black and white terms, good versus bad, and having that maybe affect your social health and emotional health as well in terms of potentially rigid dieting practices or over obsessing with exercise.
Mm.
And for me, I think it definitely got to that point of body dysmorphia as well, of someone who
Yeah.
was bigger when they were growing up and then got really into fitness and then always felt like they were bigger because they had potentially more body fat than people they hung around with.
Hmm.
And there then being that obsession with rigid dieting strategies or tracking everything completely rigidly
Yeah.
and not drinking alcohol and not missing workouts and training
Yeah.
excessively in order to reach like a pinnacle of physical condition,
Yeah.
and then that's still not even being enough. Like
Oh yeah.
I've got pictures of me being very lean,
Yeah.
like not bodybuilder lean, but visible ribs lean,
Yeah.
which for a wider guy like myself is hard to achieve.
Very, yeah.
And remember thinking like I need to be losing more weight.
Dude, I feel you. Absolutely. I feel like it's something that more guys have actually been through that than we might realize. And that journey of starting off wanting to make some improvements and then just kind of keeping on going to the point where it's never quite enough. It's almost like that slow boil.
Mm.
Like, we start, I remember I started off as a teenager with just doing some sit-ups and push-ups by my bed, like that was where it started. And from there, things just kind of progressed and I kept escalating my expectations of what I needed to do and how hard I needed to train and how strict my diet needed to be in the name of achieving that. It got past the point of simply just being in good shape and got to the point where I was aiming at what we might call like the physical male ideal. And there's that huge gap between the moderate kind of healthy habits, moderate healthy consistent habits that are needed in regards to just simply being healthy and getting in good shape. The gap between that and actually achieving that particular like optimal cover model type physique, like the
Mm.
gap in those two things, it's a very different thing. Yet we're often sold the visible abs and the cannonball shoulders, like it's just, oh, just follow these 5 steps and you'll get there,
Yeah. Where do you think
Yeah.
that came from for you?
It just, I think coming from a very like hyper masculine background, really, like I grew up in Australia. Like I obviously, like, I love the guys in my family very much. Like they're all great guys, but we're all like very hardworking, very competitive, and just things were about achievement and strength and humor as well and all that other good stuff. But there was just a lot of value placed on being strong, being successful, and, for lack of a better way to put it, being a man, like really stepping into that alpha kind of role and that stereotype kind of role. And it just escalated from there. Like that's where it started, I think. What about you? What was it that originally kind of got you rolling?
Probably my background was less like masculine household, although I did have an older brother and a dad, but more a case for me was growing up being a little bit chubbier,
Mm-hmm.
and then having a bit of a tease from that, from like certain sports and certain backgrounds, certain things like that. But also having a father who passed away from heart disease, from someone who was old, overweight and overstressed. It was that idea of, oh wow, like your health is pretty important. It can make or
Yeah.
break you. And having a
Yeah.
mum who also was on and off diets like there's no tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of led to that whole good versus bad food mentality and rigid dieting, and as such I toyed around with different ones as I got older and older, like meal plans and the paleo diet and the zone
Oh,
diet
yeah.
and all those things. And it wasn't until I had a flexible dieting coach show me calorie tracking and
Mm-hmm.
macros that I started seeing results. But then that's what took it too far for me, of like macros and flexible dieting became my diet. I was either tracking
Yeah.
or I wasn't, and I was, overeating massively.
Yeah.
So I still had that disconnect between what a healthy relationship with food looked like, and
Mm-hmm.
it took a lot of experimentation to kind of start to overcome that.
Mm-hmm.
And being within the CrossFit world as well, there was
Yeah.
that whole like looking lean, looking ripped while performing well.
Oh
But
God. Yeah.
that was what became my aspiration, because I
Yeah.
was I was surrounded by people who were also really low body fat. But
Yeah.
I was of a low body fat in my peak, but I didn't think that I was. There was severe body dysmorphia there.
How amazing is that when that happens?
Yeah, and interesting, because I'd always think, like, if I beat people on workouts or in competitions, I'd be like, haha, like, being leaner isn't the only thing that matters. And I think it took a while for me to get out of that, for sure.
Yeah. It's such an important thing that you just mentioned, like, being lean by any standards, really, but then still looking at yourself and going, but there's still more fat to lose. There's still more. I very clearly remember experiencing that at one of the worst points of my, this is where, like, I actually went through a stage of being kind of borderline anorexic before I became bulimic. So um, I'm like 5'11", 6 foot on a good day, and at my lowest weight, I got down to about 57, 58 kilos.
Wow.
And at that point, I was still looking at myself going, I'm not shredded in the way that, the guys that I'm looking at in magazine covers. And, this is like pre-social media, this is like, I was looking at magazines.
Yeah.
So, and I'm like, I'm still not there. Why am I not there? And it actually took someone to do, I'm not all for body composition tests. I think that they can be harmful, but in some ways they can be good. It's all about context. But
Mm-hmm.
in this particular instance, it took someone to do a body composition test on me and for me to actually see the numbers and look at how much I think muscle tissue on that body composition course or test was called active tissue mass, and to actually see how much muscle I'd lost. like in numbers on a page before I actually went home and looked in the mirror and went, oh my God. Like it was the weirdest thing. It was like, I was looking at myself going, I need to be leaner. I need to be leaner. Like I can't see all 6 abs, like, you know, all this kind of stuff. I can't see muscle fibers. Like, how do I get that look? Then going to get this body composition test, then coming home and going, oh my God. And it's like, I finally saw what everyone around me had been telling me they'd been seeing. My parents, my friends, but like I was in high school at the time, and you know, like high school guys, we don't really have deep conversations as high school dudes. Like everything's very like, yeah, bro. Ha, ha, ha. But I got to the point where even as a guy in high school,
Yeah.
a couple of my male friends were like, dude, you're getting really fucking thin. Like one of them even said, like, are you okay at one point? And that like for a 16, 17-year-old guy to say that, shit needs to be pretty bad. And everyone else was saying it. And I didn't see it until I went and got this test. And then it was like all of a sudden, I could see it. And it's like the body dysmorphia was just that strong. And it's not like I just snapped out of it right then and there either. It just kind of kept going. It took years, because then that borderline anorexia kind of then became bulimia, and then everything else from there. So it took a long time. It takes a long time to break out of these things once you've visited that place.
How did you start that journey of what was the pinnacle for you to think I need to make a change?
Honestly, it just took being in pain and being frustrated for a really, really long time. Like most of us who train and do these kind of things, I was very strong-willed. It takes a strong will to do any of this, which is in some ways a badge of honor. In some ways, it can be really destructive. And after over a decade of just fighting this and, you know, just working to get different results, trying every different diet, trying every different program, even using performance-enhancing drugs at certain points.
Right.
It took that long for me to go, oh my God, if I was going to get there, if I was going to get the result I wanted by using this process, I would have gotten it already. Something is amiss. Something is wrong. I don't want to spend another 10 years just banging my head against a wall. Something is wrong. I was, you know, back injuries, elbow injuries, like nothing was working. And it took me to just be in that much pain and experience that much frustration for me to just reach out to a mentor who was in his 50s at the time and looked great, for me to go, dude, what am I doing wrong? I will literally I was at a point where I was just like, I'm willing to do to the letter whatever you tell me. Help me fix this. And it really just took me to get to that point. Yeah.
And what did that process look like from there then, Marcus? You've reached out to this mentor. You've gone through different struggles of anorexia and bulimia in order to try and get shredded abs and this physique that you thought you wanted because of fitness magazines. And I've talked about fitness magazines myself because similar, when I was a teenager, social media was in its infancy. So it was fitness magazines we turned to.
Yeah, of course.
So what was the start of the process with this mentor? Did he take you on? Did he offer any sound advice?
In a nutshell, I had to begin training in a way that prioritized how my body was feeling and my performance rather than aesthetics. I had to really tune into, like, I was in that much pain. And like I said, experiencing that much frustration, I kind of was like, right, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
I was like, right, fuck it. I don't care. I don't care anymore. I don't care about like looking a certain way or whatever. I was just like, I just don't want to be in pain anymore. How do I do this? And so I started doing a training program that was focused on pain-free movement, still resistance training, but it was focused not on, getting as strong as possible or looking a certain way. It was just focused on pain-free resistance training, and as well, just allowing myself to have certain foods. Like this same mentor, he sat me down and said, mate, you look like you just need a fucking feed. Like really, like, and he just got me like changing my diet a little bit. He's like, look, after a workout, give yourself some fucking carbs, for fuck's sake, you know. And he was there, that was my therapy. And that worked for me, you know, like someone that I trusted who'd gotten the results that I wanted, sitting down and just going, mate, come on, let's just do this. And it worked. Like prioritizing, just putting some variation in my food, eating whatever I wanted after workouts and everything like that, and always being able to say, well, I've had enough. If I've like, I don't feel a need to keep eating now because I can always just have a bit more tomorrow. And then prioritizing feeling good in my training sessions, like movements and drills, workouts, whatever that actually made the body feel good. That actually led to some of the best aesthetic results that I've ever achieved. Like, so yeah. What was your process when it comes to, you know, you reach that point where you're doing CrossFit, super lean, still aiming for like super high performance? What was it that really got you to, because you always give the impression now of being very balanced, very intelligent with your training, very intelligent, very balanced with the way you approach nutrition. So what got you to this place from where you were?
Well, I tried to be clever with my training from quite a bit on. So I'd reached a point where I was doing different like competitive training programs, but almost not hitting a wall, but maybe sometimes having overuse injuries and things just sort of like not really sitting right. And I did have that nutrition help for a long time where it was all about tracking, and I'd gotten very lean and kept thinking, oh, do I need to be leaner? And I kind of knocked that on the head as I started my own journey into getting certified as a nutritionist, and thought to myself, hey, I'm going to try out different approaches. Like, you know, I'll try out being habit-based rather than being macro-based, and I'll try out what this kind of looks like. And I kind of just played around with different, I had the knowledge of tracking and macros, and I kind of thought, well, what happens if I do it this way? And so I sort of just played around with different things and saw how I could maintain a pretty good physique without having to track my calories. And so that was sort of like my jump out of it. And then when I moved away from London and stepped away from, well, I stepped into a gym where there was a coach who had been doing like very clever programming and was talking to me about programming principles that weren't just, you know, just train as hard as you can all the time, and do different things you can, and was like, let's talk about like actually doing some periodization, but for CrossFit in particular. So I started working with him, and we put in a series of training phases, which was very new to me, like actually having phases of training for certain periods of time for certain adaptations.
Yeah, nice.
And that saw me perform much better in CrossFit than I ever had done.
Amazing.
So I was instantly like, cool, this is working. And it was about, and it was interesting because it was about, you only really go hard when you're really trying to go hard. And then the rest of the time you're kind of taking it. It was a difference between aerobic training and anaerobic training, which I'd never been taught before. Yeah. And how to use that for CrossFit. So it's like, you know, a CrossFit workout is a test, but training is training and testing is testing, and they're different things. Yeah. So that started my training journey. And what happened is I actually ended up getting to some really great numbers, and things were kind of peaking, but I ended up getting injured at a competition. Rough. Really quite bad shoulder and elbow injury. Oof. And at the same time, decided to turn my life upside down, quit my job, go full-time with online coaching, and travel Australia for 3 months.
Wow. So, when was that? Like, how long ago was that?
So that was end of 2017, start of 2018.
Amazing.
So I then had a few months off any formal training, traveling Australia, kind of finding myself, as it were, and seeing a part of the world I'd never seen before, enjoying online coaching. And that allowed me to kind of reflect on my values, priorities. And I did come back and try the kind of CrossFit competitive thing again, but I'd found that post-injury, post that time off, everyone else had kind of kept going, and I'd kind of sort of gone downwards, and I'd have to work much harder to try and climb back up. And by this point, I was sort of 28, 29. So I'm thinking, maybe I just knocked this on the head. Started to reflect on what my values were around training. And it was just a case of, I enjoy training in this way. Not a massive fan of the pain cave, to be honest, but
The pain cave, yeah.
I like being fit. I like Olympic lifting. I like looking good.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept the functional aspect of training,
Yeah.
mixed it with some bodybuilding, kept doing aerobic work because of, you know, the health benefits of it, but
Yeah.
just dropped any anaerobic work from my training.
Mm.
So that's where I am now. It's just a case of looking good, moving well,
Mm-hmm.
enjoying training, and not letting it take over my entire day either. Like one session a day, 4 times a week.
Nice.
That's fine for what I've got. But I think what I always stress to people, Marcus, I guess, is going to one end allows you to kind of come back from that end. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
being able to track and everything allows me to step back from being able to track, and going to an extreme of training allows me to kind of step back from an extreme of training, because there's a difference, I guess, between achieving a result and maintaining a result.
Oh, yes.
But
Yeah.
I'm definitely much more balanced in the state that I am now.
Though something in particular that you just said, then there's a difference between achieving a result and maintaining a result. That is something that, you know, everyone I probably think should get given like on a little business card when they start working out. Like, you know, if everyone carried a card that said that in their wallet when they started going to the gym, things might be a little different in a really magical way. Yeah. Like
Definitely.
there's so many people shooting for peak strength, peak health, peak everything. It's like we can't be peak all the fucking time. Like there's got to be that kind of ebb and flow. So, dude, such an amazing and concise and brilliant thing that you just said then in that little phrase there. It's just magical.
I think it comes down to finding guidance as well, doesn't it? Like both you and I have had guidance in different areas to help
Yeah.
us establish values, establish priorities, and go through that exploration of what works and what we need to do to get the results that kind of we want, or to pair those things together. What I wanted to ask you, Marcus, you know, you started working with this mentor who gave you that guidance that you needed and sort of gave you the permission to eat more food, and you kind of took that gradually.
Yeah.
How long was that process for you before you were able to break free of any desire to be bulimic or any desire to go back to old habits?
That's a really interesting question, because although it did break me out of a lot of destructive habits, especially surrounding training and bulimia, there was still, you know, clinical binge eating disorder that remained. And that was really the final thing that was, you know, the last piece of the puzzle that I had to spend a bit more time on correcting. Because yeah, I you know, I flattened out some of the bumps in my training that were causing issues. I discovered a much more balanced approach to food. But by this stage, I had been essentially bulimic for over a decade. And I'd been using the fitness industry model of clean days, cheat day for like almost 15 years. So although I knew better, although I was like, okay, I need to break out of this, things are more balanced, I still retained that drive to binge eat. Like, especially, you know, it was like there was an internal clock inside me that knew when Sunday came around, you know, that knew when Friday night was there, that was just like, it was mad. And it was so frustrating and so confusing, because I knew I wanted to stop. I knew that I had permission to you know, eat carbs, to do all that kind of stuff throughout the week. But the internal drive to periodically binge eat still remained. And that took me about another 12 months of discovery and research and everything like that to really find proper answers for
Yeah.
that particular problem.
Yeah. I think it is definitely a big component of that eat clean,
Oh yeah.
cheat day mentality, because that was definitely what I was in, was the eat clean Monday to Thursday,
Yeah.
cheat
Yeah.
weekend Friday to Sunday, and be
It's a
like back on it Monday.
it's a really rough habit to try and kick.
Yeah.
Like, I've even gone so far as to to speak to neurologists about this in terms of neural pathways in the brain and how habits develop and why we feel drawn to certain habits and everything like that. Like it's been a massive and very interesting journey, but yeah, I went on a really deep dive in order to find some answers for that.
I think that's correct. That's great though, isn't it? Is exploring that, because I find that there's such a bias still towards the clean eating paradigm that I find really dangerous. And I've talked about this quite a lot. I've actually come under fire on it on Instagram a few times of like, what do you even believe in if you don't believe in clean eating? Like, well, I just believe in having a balanced diet. Like,
I believe in happiness.
I don't believe in giving labels to food, and clean is one of them. And I think we can all agree in what a more nutrient dense food is.
Of course, yeah.
But it's escaping from the words clean, dirty, good, bad. Because as soon as you start labeling foods which have some kind of emotional connotation, there's then that idea of judging yourself for consuming a certain food. Like, oh, I'm good because I've eaten clean. Oh, I'm bad because I've had a pizza. And you're like, dude, you're not fucking someone else's girlfriend. You're just eating a pizza. You know what I mean?
Oh my God. Yeah. Oh, well, the emotional attachment, the either positive or negative emotional attachment to different foods, is such a slippery slope, right? Like,
how do you? Sorry to cut across you.
That's all right.
Go on, finish your point.
I think that was it. I was done.
I was going to ask how you found working that through with your own clients. You know, working through men who have disordered eating, because we use a lot of that thought challenging process. I imagine you're the same of saying, okay, well, like, why do you think that way about that food, and what would be a better way to think about that food? But how do you find you approach it?
I approach it from a perspective of, I talk about the relationship between different parts of the brain a lot, and I compare that relationship to, you know, if we were working with, say, animals or children. So whatever we like, I'm a dog person. I know you are too. I see your labs in your posts all the time. They're Labradors, right?
Yeah,
they're beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I always compare it to dogs for myself, but you know, same thing applies with kids. Because I experienced this as a child as well. Like I had a fairly strict approach to nutrition as a child, with the best intentions and everything like that. But whenever we put something out of bounds, we just want it more. Like it really is as simple as that. Like, you know, we see it when we're not allowed something, especially kids or animals. We can see this really, really clearly. And when we talk about like different parts of the brain interacting with each other, there's our kind of like higher human brain, like our neocortex and all that kind of stuff, like really highly evolved. But then there's our lower brain that has more of an animal kind of function. And then there's our body as well. So it's almost like we've got this, and this is a crude example, by the way, like, you know, a neurologist or someone like that, or maybe a psychotherapist might poke a few holes in this theory, but, you know, not even the most advanced psychotherapists or psychiatrists in the world really understand exactly how each part of the brain works. It's not like a machine with very distinct moving parts. So we do our best. We do our best to explain this in ways that are useful rather than absolutely technically accurate. So any neurologists or psychotherapists listening, forgive me for this example, but there's like the neocortex, and there's like the lower brain, like the animal brain, and then there's our body. And often, you know, when we think of that all as one thing, it's sometimes much more helpful to think of that as like almost three separate entities, where the animal brain and the body are much stronger than the neocortex, but the neocortex is where our human intelligence and reasoning and everything happens. And it's like the neocortex's job to lead the animal brain and the body, the lower brain and the body, in such a way that it takes care of all three people or all three entities in that relationship. But if the neocortex makes shitty decisions, eventually, sooner or later, there's going to be a mutiny.
Mhm.
Sooner or later, the animal brain and the body are going to be like, look, fuck you, this is a shit ride, you know, and they're going to start rebelling. They're going to start sending urges to binge eat. They, you know, hormones are going to begin to be out of whack. And that's just going to make it increasingly difficult for the conscious decision-making machine or the human brain, like the neocortex, to actually get us to where we consciously want to go. Because instead of working with a body and a lower brain that's on our side and working with us, it's like we'll be dragging these fuckers behind us, trying to get, and that's where, you know, misconceptions about willpower kind of come in. You know, when we talk about willpower and discipline and all that kind of thing, a lot of people are just talking about grabbing the body and the lower brain by the fucking neck and dragging them with us for as long as we can handle. But things work much better when those three things, neocortex, lower brain, and body, are all on the same page. So that's usually where I come at those things. I'm like, it's not a question of what works and what doesn't. It's a question of what will actually work in the long term, like what will actually get you there. The only way to do that is to have those three entities or those three people, whatever we want to call them, on the same page and working together. If we don't do that, we're just set up for a disaster.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, it's the hierarchy of needs we have as like an individual. Like all we want is to feel safe and feel secure, and we have those emotional needs that we have, and it's staying checked into what the body really wants, and having the brain acknowledge it, but being able to direct it in a logical manner. Like you mentioned, there's a logical brain and like the animal brain.
Yeah.
I often refer to the same analogy that they talk about in the book Switch, where it's like the elephant is your animal brain.
Yes.
And the rider is your logical brain.
Yeah.
And you're trying to guide the elephant, but really, if the elephant wants to do something, you're probably going to do it. And if the, you know, so, and the elephant's going to protect itself based on what the path gives it. It's like the path is like our environment, and the elephant will go where your environment is around. So you can take that to like preparing your environment around you to be more set up for success. Yes. But there's also that idea of, well, if you're not listening to your body and there are urges or there are emotions and sensations that you aren't properly addressing, it could spiral into actions that you don't want, hence disordered eating. So a lot of the time disordered eating comes from because you're not dealing with stress properly, you're not dealing with emotions properly, you're not dealing with boredom properly, but not just not dealing with them, you're not addressing them for what they are.
Yeah.
So they're manifesting itself as maybe a craving or hunger or an urge, but really it's just because you're bored or it's because you're stressed. And there would be another way to deal with that if you were to only notice it, name it, and address it properly. And so it's like that. We give that analogy and talk about that method as a really great way to think what's actually going on here. Because a lot of the time we just use food and exercise as self-soothers, when really they're not what we need in that moment.
Yeah, so on point. I mean, how many of us have opened the fridge or gone to the gym when that's not really what we need, you know? Like, so yeah, so many of us actually do that. I'm still guilty of doing that sometimes. The difference is though that these days, this is why often I've seen you do this as well, like clarify the difference between binge eating and emotional eating. Sometimes we're human. Sometimes emotional eating is going to happen. Sometimes we're going to make emotional choices. Though the difference between the, you know, occasionally realizing that we're emotionally eating and binge eating is like, I know, just the other day, like we've got a new puppy. I'm very sleep deprived. He's a Belgian Malinois. So he's like a cyclone on pause, and he will be a very good dog one day. It's just now he's 6 months old and a total rat bag. So my girlfriend and I are like dealing with this furry cyclone. And the other day, like I just grabbed a tub of ice cream out of the freezer. I'm like, you know what? I'm just checking out. I'm going to have an afternoon. I'm going to sit down, watch a movie, and I'm going to eat this. And it was a very conscious decision. It's like, I know that I'm emotionally eating right now. I know that that's happening. I'm making the conscious decision to do this.
Yeah.
But maybe the difference between that and 5 years ago is that 5 years ago, that tub of ice cream would have gone, and then I would have walked to the shop and bought like 30 or 50 quid more of like, everything else, and being like, it wouldn't have been just a tub of ice cream. It'd be like, this is going to be the afternoon and the evening now, and I'll just start fresh tomorrow. So
Yeah, and there would have been that shame associated with it,
yeah,
as
of
opposed
course.
to, you mentioned there was a conscious decision of like, fuck it, I'm sleep deprived, I'm knackered, I'm gonna watch a movie, I'm gonna eat some ice cream, I'm gonna have a bit of a pity party, and then I'll forget about it. You probably,
Exactly.
you probably adjusted your food naturally based on hunger and
Yeah.
the rest of the day, or even the next day, and you just thought,
Yep.
maybe not the best way to deal with that issue, but I decided to do it, and therefore that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas there's not that, like, that's the difference between normal and disordered eating. Is normal eating is
Yeah.
deciding whether to indulge in that craving or not, and owning the decision and not feeling guilty for it, versus the, shit, what have I done? Like,
Yeah.
I'm such a bad person, I've wrecked
Mm-hmm.
everything, I'll go and buy 50 quid's worth more of sweets because
Yeah.
what's the point?
Yeah.
And I'll start again tomorrow, next Monday, next month, whatever.
Yeah.
There's that disalign there between what a normal, like, urge, a normal way to indulge in that craving is, versus another. Like, I gave an example about Easter weekend just this last Easter, when I was
I
like,
loved that example, man. That was
I
great.
totally
Yeah.
overate. I totally overate, but that's okay. Like, I felt like I needed it, and I
Yeah.
really enjoyed it, and I spent the time with my friends and family, and had a few too many beers, and had some slices of cake, and I knew that I was doing it. I was like, I'm not hungry, but I want that slice of cake.
Yeah.
And then I was like, that's okay, like, because it's not what I do all the time.
Mm.
And so I chose to do that rather than felt compelled to do it, and guilty after doing it.
It's incredible how when we experience those moments and try and deny ourselves during those moments, we end up paying for it in one way or another later. Like, I'm wondering if you may have experienced this, or anyone listening to this may have experienced this, because I know I definitely have, like going to a party or a family function or just some kind of social event, and like, lifting myself up by the bootstraps with my willpower all day,
Mm.
sticking to nothing but this is many years ago, sticking to nothing but like the hummus and celery dip, and eating, even though there were all these like delicious foods around, and family was around or friends was around, like being really, quote, good during that occasion. But then maybe later that night, or even on the drive home, just stopping at a service station and ending up eating like 2,500 calories worth of shit just in my car, like, whether that be the night after or the day after, whatever. It's like, if we really try and like chain ourselves down and deny ourselves during those times when it might be appropriate to do that, it's like we end up paying for it double later. Because that my example with the ice cream, like, that was just the other day. I have not felt like having ice cream since, because it's like, well, it's fine, I don't want any, that's
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
But when we don't acknowledge those things, of course there's a balance as well. Like, if we just give in to our impulses with food all the time, then that's a problem. But like you said, it's that conscious decision. May not be the best way to handle something, but there's a conscious decision there. And if we try and suppress that every single time,
Mm.
then it's like a credit card. We're going to pay for it eventually.
Yeah, and it's good that you mentioned about, like, it was like the next day or whatever where that spiraled into an episode of overeating for you,
Mm,
because people often don't associate the episode of eating with the actual trigger event, which could have been
yeah.
much longer before, the days before. But you're right in that we need to clarify that difference between, you're not indulging in food all the time,
Mm,
there's a difference then between giving yourself unconditional permission to eat the food that you want and that your body wants and needs in that moment, versus not doing so. Because a lot of the time the overeating happens because you've gone so long with being restrictive, and it's that
Yeah.
forbidden fruit that you're never allowed.
Yeah.
That's what leads into overeating episodes. Whereas you've got a tub of ice cream in your freezer, you chose to eat it the other day, it was probably in your freezer already
Yeah.
because it's part of your natural life to have it and allow it when you want it, as opposed to think, oh, I can't buy that and I can't have that in the house because it's a bad food.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that leads to more problems than people realize.
Yeah, for sure. The the when people say, talk about refusing to have certain foods in the house, I've always felt, mixed about that. I'm sure there might be some times where it's appropriate to do that, but getting into a habit of that being like a permanent coping mechanism, if it's in the name of like a short-term thing to slowly break away from certain foods or slowly reestablish a healthier relationship with certain foods, like maybe keeping some of them like out of your, out of arm's reach might be an okay thing to do. But, long term, if we're relying on things just being inconveniently accessible, then it's not really a strategy that I've seen leads to really winning in the long term.
No, like I've got very mixed feelings on that for that exact reason. That whole like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm never going to touch that food ever again. It's like, well,
Yeah.
is that really how you're going to live the rest of your life?
Yeah.
And I think some people do it and do stick with that, and that's fine. And there is that idea of certain foods being really bad trigger foods,
Mm.
and then so they've got to take them out for a short term, as you said. But it's like a phobia.
Yeah.
People don't get over their phobia of spiders by never seeing a spider ever again. They
Oh
get over
man.
they get over their phobia through reintroducing that to their life in a graded approach. Like,
Yeah.
oh right, okay, there's just a picture of a spider in a room, and how do I feel about that? And then okay, now there's a live spider, but it's in a cage and it's the other side of the room. And then you're
Mm.
gradually introduced to this spider over time, of like, oh okay, like this isn't something for me to be scared of anymore. And I
Mm.
think with trigger foods, there could be that graded approach where it's like, okay,
Yeah.
let's remove it now for the sake of, because it's just every time you see it, you can't control it. Let's prime your environment, as in like your cupboards and your fridge, to have more foods that you want to enjoy more of. So like let's turn up the good, and then over time, let's establish a better relationship with this food, maybe through conversations, through imagery, trialing reintroducing it as a graded approach, like order it at a restaurant in a serving and enjoy that serving of it, and then
Yeah.
maybe doing it that way. But I'm not a massive fan of like, oh, just cut those foods out of your life, you don't need them anymore, like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. It's like as if that's gonna happen,
I'm
really.
gonna want to eat ice cream again one day and not feel compelled to overeat it. So
Yeah. And there's the very practical factor of like how many of us live totally alone, like whether we've got partner or flatmate or live with friends or whatever, those people aren't always going to agree with ridding the house or the apartment of foods that are a trigger for someone else. It's like,
exactly.
it's like, what, you're telling me that because you're on a new diet, I've got to not keep my favorite ice cream in the house? Fuck you, like.
Yeah.
So yeah, and this I'm sure we've seen this so much, where things like that, strategies like that, can really break apart in terms of trying to introduce them when someone has a family. It's like, well, the kids are going to want to eat certain foods. Husband, wife, partner, girlfriend, whatever, like they're going to want to eat stuff. And the moment we start restricting the people around us based on our own kind of diet requirements, that it's another slippery slope.
Yeah, and it's going to create disconnect. It's going to create argumentative
Mm.
situations, and it's going to create an even harder situation to try and adhere to, because
Yeah.
there's going to be that constant pull. Oh, why is this the case? And I'm all for including your family, your partners, your friends in your goals, and
Yeah.
be like, I'm trying to be fitter and healthier. And as I said to you, there's a difference between achieving a result and maintaining a result. And you and I both know that the science of eating fewer calories or drinking less alcohol and stuff and doing those for health-based reasons. But there's that balance between doing it in a non-restrictive way and doing it in a very rigid, restrictive, can't have anything way. And it's moving away from that, which is very much predominant in the hustle harder, have more willpower, try harder, men's health ethos, which is where a lot of our values as men come from.
Yeah.
So go on.
No, you go. I was just going to say, that hustle culture has a lot to answer for.
Yeah. Because it's just that whole don't feel anything, and it's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be hard, and you're supposed to hate your life and do more burpees. And you're like, no, I don't want to.
No, I don't want to.
I don't want to see one ever again in my life.
Fuck your burpees. I don't want to do burpees.
Marcus, there's been a really great conversation.
Yeah.
Before we wound out, I want to ask about your story as a rock star. And what's the background there? Tell us a bit more about
it. I guess B grade rock star is what I always say, because it's like I was never a household name or anything like that, but I was playing on the same stages as people who were household names. And at one point I was hired by a UK band called The Wedding Present, who were quite big in the early 90s. I was hired by them as their guitarist for their 30th anniversary tour. Before that, I was working with an original band out of Australia called 2200, who, when I was working with that band, I really kind of cut my teeth in that band. And we did a bunch of tours opening for Slash, the Guns N' Roses guitarist. And at the same time, I was 100% set on this goal of I'm going to play on big stages. It's I never wanted to be a household name or anything like that. It's my goal was to play rock and roll on big stages and do it with the body of a pro athlete. That's what I wanted. I was not willing to compromise on that. And ironically, some of I had to do a lot of work to get over my stage fright in the early days. I went from, playing with my high school band to opening for Slash in Singapore, what felt like overnight. I was in way over my depth, punching well over my, punching up like crazy. And I had to see a psychologist to talk about my stage fright, because it was getting so bad that I would walk on stage and my hands would shake, my legs would shake, and I was wearing skinny jeans, of course, so you could see. And it just wasn't a good look. I used to forget songs at auditions. And, in what I had to do to get past stage fright, I realized much, much later, almost a decade later, wow, actually these same principles are a cornerstone of recovery from disordered eating and body dysmorphia. I was like, wow, I've actually had the skill set all along, but it was it was in a language that I didn't recognize, and I just needed to transfer those skills across. And I guess trying to really do it all and to be on world tours and sacrificing sleep and trying to maintain that body while on not high budget tours, it just burnt me out crazy, and I had to reevaluate a whole bunch of stuff. But yeah, the experience of being a B grade rock star for a few years had a really crazy and profound influence on the way that I coach nutrition now, and the way that I look at our thoughts and emotions, and how we, ideally, as much as possible, we want to recognize our physical needs and physical urges, but then as far as mental game, we need to place distance between our thoughts and our emotions. Because from a perspective of performance and peak performance, anyone who's had to perform under pressure, you would have had to do this during competitions, no doubt, CrossFit competitions. We can't believe every single thought that we experience. if we're trying to perform under pressure, because when we try and perform under pressure, there's going to be a part of our brain that's just going, you're going to fuck this up. You're going to fuck this up so bad. And you're going to look like such a dick. Like, and if we let that go straight from thought to emotion, then we're going to like shit ourselves and we're going to perform really badly. So creating that gap and recognizing those things, but as well in the name of food, can really, really help when we're moving through some of the discomfort associated with moving away from destructive eating patterns.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's that thought reframing, isn't it, that we talked about earlier of, I've had this thought, where's that come from? What's a better way to look at this? Like, what's reality? And then how can I reframe that now in order to do what I need to do? So like stage fright, so common, and like nerves under any performance are so common, and it's like reframing those nerves and that adrenaline to be like, it's because I care so much about what I want to do, but I've got years of experience, I've got years of practice, I'm clearly good enough because I'm in this band or I'm in this situation. Let's use that positively and have a cracking gig. Let's have a cracking performance. And similar with food, like, okay, like I feel this way, where's that come from? What's reality? What's a better way of thinking about it? And how does that then help me move forward? And it takes that time and that mindfulness and that practice to get used to doing that, rather than, as you said, just reacting out of emotion, which is what a lot of us do with food and fitness.
Yeah. And you're going to be performing again soon too, right? You're in a
drum roll. Oh man, it's like Marcus, you weren't supposed to bring it up. We talked about it before.
Really?
No, I'm joking. It like makes it look like we talked about this pre-air, which we obviously didn't.
No, I saw one of your posts about this like a week ago or something like that, and I was like, hell yeah, like that's awesome.
So for everyone listening to the podcast and fans of the Singing Nutritionist, it's a 3-week tour, but it's unpaid. So, you know, I'm not back in the pro game.
You should have just left that out.
Yeah. It's unpaid. I'm not back in the pro game, but yeah, we're doing Rent the Musical.
Amazing.
Three different theatres, Leeds, Hull, and York in March and April next year. So that'll be cool. Be good to be back on stage for sure. It's been a long time.
I would love to come and see that one.
Oh, I'll hook you up.
Thank you.
As if I've got the power to do that. I'll send you the link. And
Sweet, perfect. Yeah,
sort you out. But Marcus, you know, it's been great to have you on the show.
Likewise, Johnny. Thank you so much.
I'm guessing Instagram is the best place to send people to. Have you got anywhere else that people can find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah, Instagram is the most reliable one right now. I'm guaranteed to get messages or get comments or whatever if you go to my Instagram. So yeah, keeping it simple, Instagram is the best place to reach me.
Brilliant. Well, we'll link that up in the notes. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And for the people who might be listening to this on one of my platforms, Johnny, if someone wants to hear more from you, where should they go?
Instagram is one of the best places, at Next Step Nutrition Ltd or at Johnny Landals. I'm quite prolific on both platforms. And those would be the best places to link up to like podcasts and YouTubes and all the other things.
Cool. All right, it's been really nice talking to you, Johnny. Thanks, man.
Thank you.